Spider-Man.
Spider-Man. Spider-Man.
Spider-Man!
Spider-Man.
Spider-Man. Spider-Man.
The greatest superhero of all time.
My name is Peter B. Parker. I was bitten by a radioactive spider. I was the one and only Spider-Man.
With great power,
there must also come
great responsibility. Uncle Ben said it. The day he died.
Everybody knows the story of Spider-Man the superhero, but not everybody knows the story of Spider-Man, the transmedia pop culture phenomenon. This is that story.
Spider-Man, how'd it come about? Well, I had already done the Fantastic Four and the Hulk.
My publisher came to me and he said, Stan, I want you to come up with another superhero. The most important thing in a superhero at first is the superpower. Once you get that, everything else comes along.
I was sitting and I saw a fly crawling on the wall. And I said, wow, suppose a person had the power to stick to a wall like an insect.
I thought that was good. Now I needed a name.
Mosquito Man, that didn't have any glamour. Insect Man, that was even worse.
Fly Man.
And I got to Spider-Man.
Spider-Man. It just sounded dramatic.
He cited an American pulp magazine hero named the Spider, created in 1933, running to 1943 for the inspiration of the name. Not only did he struggle with fighting both criminal underworld as well as having a conflict with the police department, he also possesses a sixth sense to alert him of danger.
You know, it's an interesting story. Jack Kirby was probably the greatest comic book artist around, and I worked with him. We collaborated on so many strips, and I wanted Jack originally to do the Spider-Man, but I didn't want Spider-Man to look heroic. I wanted him to be just a typical nebbishy kind of guy. I mentioned that to Jack, but Jack was so used to drawing Captain America and characters like that.
And Jack drew the first couple of pages, and I was looking over his shoulder, and I said, wait a minute, you're still making him too glamorous looking.
You got him looking too heroic.
So I said, forget it, Jack. I'll give it to someone else. So it occurred to me to give it to Steve Ditko.
Steve designed the character.
The colors.
Everything about the costume. And he also gave it such personality. He got that feeling of an average guy who turned into a hero and still had problems.
And Steve brought so much to the strip, and I don't think the strip would have been as successful without Steve. So, okay, I had my hero, I had his power, his name, and then I figured just for fun, I'm gonna give him personal problems. Then I thought I'd make him a teenager, because there were no teenage superheroes that I knew of at the time. So armed with all that wonderful material, those great ideas, I ran into my publisher's office and I told him, this was my reaction, the reaction he gave me. Stan, that is the worst idea I have ever heard. First of all, people hate spiders, so you can't call a hero Spider-Man. You want him to be a teenager? Teenagers can only be sidekicks. And you want him to have personal problems? Stan, don't you know what a superhero is? They don't have personal problems. I couldn't get Spider-Man out of my system.
To Stan, Spider-Man was a hero who wasn't a hero by definition. A hero who had interest in himself, not in the well-being of his community. Not exactly the Superman type Goodman was looking for.
While Martin Goodman was a great guy and a good publisher, I didn't like really what he wanted me to do.
Old publishers were very, very narrow-minded.
He felt comics were just for young kids or stupid adults. And that was fine, I was doing it, but it wasn't satisfying. I really wanted to quit and try something else. And I remember Joan said to me, Stan, if you want to quit, why don't you do one book the way you would like to do it? Our competitor, DC Comics, they had done a book called The Justice League, a group of superheroes, and it was selling very well. He said to me, Stan, why don't you do a book about a group of superheroes? So I figured this is my chance to do it my way. I came up with something I called the Fantastic Four, about 4 superheroes. The hero, he's a scientist. The obligatory teenager, guy who didn't want to be a superhero. The girl, instead of an obligatory female who always has to be rescued, she also had a superpower. And the 4th guy was a monster. He was hot-tempered, but I got a lot of comedy out of them. I called him The Thing. Well, the book did wonderfully. I got a lot of fan mail, and we had almost never gotten fan mail before. And all the letters said essentially the same thing. We love the book. It's the greatest. We'll keep buying it forever. You're the greatest writer. Jack is the greatest artist. It's terrific. But If you don't give them costumes, we'll never buy another issue. I will never understand why, but for some reason, people like their superheroes to wear costumes.
Stan was having a difficult time accepting defeat. He would continue to wear Goodman down to the best of his ability. Finally, a glimmer of hope appeared.
So we were about to kill a magazine. I think it was called Amazing Fantasy. It wasn't selling well, and we were sending the last issue to press. When you do the last issue of a magazine, nobody cares what you put in it. Just to get it out of my system, I put Spider-Man in Amazing Fantasy, feature him on the cover.
A final way to confirm or deny if his idea was great.
If you have an idea that you genuinely think is good, don't let some idiot talk you out of it. You can only do your best work if you're doing what you want to do, and if you're doing it the way you think it should be done.
After all this time, the comic was published.
And I forgot about it.
In the 6 months that followed, they were busy creating other characters like Doctor Strange.
I do also love Doctor Strange. He was so different.
Steve Ditko did a wonderful job.
Unbeknownst to Lee, Ditko, and Goodman, Amazing Fantasy number 15 was flying off the shelves. People loved Spider-Man, and Marvel had no idea. To get an actual, reliable sales figures report back then could take up to 9 whole months. Lee had just stuck him in a dying comic, hoping to get Spider-Man out of his system.
Well, a month later, the sales figures came in. It had been our biggest seller. So my publisher came to me and said, Stan, do you remember that character that we both liked so much, Spider-Man? Why don't you do a series?
Lee was ecstatic by the prospect of continuing his Spider-Man series. He loved the idea of being able to tell more stories with his character, especially in the same universe as other characters created around this time. Like
Fantastic Four, the X-Men, and the Hulk.
the first comic was to feature the Fantastic Four as guest stars. In fact, the front cover would feature them directly. Comic book readers at the time loved the ambitious idea of a shared comic book universe. To put it simply, audiences were head over heels for what Marvel was doing at the time.
What constitutes a hero?
Basically, to me, a hero has to be somebody who will take great chances to help others, but still have human traits, still not be perfect. When they become perfect, they become dull.
I used to feel that the characters weren't realistic because they never had any problems. Their only problem was, how can I beat the villain? If I do any superhero characters, I would like to make them three-dimensional so that the reader can see what do they do when they're not chasing the villain? How do they make their money? What about their family? Where do they live? And so forth. Everybody has things that they worry about. Even though they were heroes, I wanted to give them little personal problems to make them more believable.
The Amazing Spider-Man #1 was released to rousing critical and financial fanfare. To audiences, Spider-Man was so much more than just a superhero. He was a representation of not only possibilism, but responsibility. Readers revered Spider-Man's uniqueness. He surpassed the current limitations expected of comic magazines at the time. Lee and Ditko were enthusiastic to make more Amazing Spider-Man comics. Already, Spider-Man was competing with the Fantastic Four as Marvel's best-selling comic. The Amazing Spider-Man was on a path of major success, with Steve Ditko and Stan Lee being at the forefront. Over the course of 4 years, Amazing Fantasy #15, 2 Spider-Man annuals, and 38 whole issues, Lee and Ditko would grow a respectable storyline.
When Stan ran out of time and could not supply everybody with scripts, he would give him a verbal quick thing, just a 5-page sequence to give him time to write the rest of the script. When we started doing our own artwork before the words, guys like Jack Kirby suddenly turned nothing stories into exciting visuals because he had to fill the space. Turned out to be the best idea in comics history because now it became the visual medium it should have been from the beginning. He was free now to do dialogue he wouldn't have thought of. The whole thing opened up. It became a whole new industry. And I don't know why people don't make more of it. To me, it was like discovery of the wheel in the history of comics.
Unfortunately, all was not well in paradise. Lee and Ditko's friendship would start to show its cracks.
I guess I'm a very conceited guy. I want to be doing all the talking. I forgot to tell you, I'm also my biggest fan. I always loved advertising. I always wanted to be in the advertising business.
Stan Lee is unquestionably an extrovert. He kept up with modern lingo and attempted to appeal to a younger audience.
When I was at Marvel, Steve Ditko used to come up and sit in my office, or sit in Ralph's office. He was a philosopher. So he's a very unique person.
Ditko was an introvert, no doubt. He shunned interviews and avoided them whenever possible. Ditko disliked talking about himself, especially when relating to his work. Even with the major differences in personality, appearance, and even political opinions, they were able to form a strong working relationship. They considered themselves to be beyond colleagues and true friends.
As they continued to weave the tale of Spider-Man, their friendship had been tested. Over 4 years and 41 issues, they broke apart. Often, the main point cited as what tore them apart was the identity of the Green Goblin. They both wanted different directions for the character, and eventually it caused Ditko to leave the series.
In the past, Stan Lee has often been referred to as the sole creator of Spider-Man.
He had complained to me a number of times when there were articles written about Spider-Man which called me the creator of Spider-Man. And I had always thought I was, because I'm the guy who said, I have an idea for a strip called Spider-Man. Steve had said, having an idea is nothing, because it's just an idea. And he said it took him to draw the strip and to give it life, so to speak, or to make it actually something tangible. Otherwise, all I had was an idea. So I said to him, well, I think the person with the idea is the person who creates it. And he said, no, because I drew it. Steve definitely felt that he was the co-creator of Spider-Man. After he said it, and I saw it meant a lot to him, that was fine with me. So I said, fine, I'll tell everybody you're the co-creator. That didn't quite satisfy him, so I sent him a letter. To whom it may concern, I consider Steve Ditko to be the co-creator of Spider-Man, along with me. And I found out that Steve still objected to that because he felt I used the word consider. I consider Steve to be the co-creator. Apparently, he felt that wasn't definite enough. So at that point, I gave up. I haven't spoken to him or heard from him since, I don't think.
But do you yourself believe that he co-created it?
I'm willing to say so. No, I really think the guy who dreams the thing up created it. You dream it up and then you give it to anybody to draw it. I mean...
But if it had been drawn differently, it might not have been successful or a hit, I suppose.
Yeah, but then I would have had created something that didn't succeed. I think if Steve wants to be called the co-creator, I think he deserves to be called the co-creator because he had done such a wonderful job.
They unfortunately wouldn't be able to mend their friendship until both of their deaths in 2018.
Point do you hand over the reins of Spider-Man, and to whom?
Well, artistically, Steve eventually left after, I don't know, 20, 30, 40, some amount of books, and John Romita took over as the artist. John doesn't draw like Steve, his style is different, but I said we don't want to disturb the readers by suddenly seeing a totally different style. Do you think you could make it look like Steve for a while? He did such a great job. Those first few issues looked like Steve had done them. But then little by little, he began to draw it in his own style, and it became his strip.
It's funny, when I first started for Stan, I went from $20 a page, and every time I went in, his enthusiasm was accompanied by generosity. He'd say, I love this, this is great, call up a secretary, give John Romita a $2 raise. Every other time I'd go in there, he would give me a raise. I went from $20 a page to $40 a page in like a year and a half, 2 years, and I was just still basically an amateur.
Romita failed to live up to Ditko according to some readers, which isn't completely unwarranted, as in Ditko and Lee's run, they would create by far the most successful Spider-Man villains besides Venom, such as the Chameleon, the Vulture, Doc Ock, Sandman, Lizard, Electro, Mysterio, Green Goblin, Kraven the Hunter, and the Scorpion. While Romita and Lee would go on to create the Kingpin, the Rhino, and Shocker, none of them would reach the height of those created by Lee and Ditko. Even after the departure of Steve Ditko, Spider-Mania roared on. Spider-Man does whatever. The first episode of Spider-Man aired on ABC in September 9th, 1967. Even with its minuscule budget, clearly reflected by the animation, it was successful. Although Lee and Romita would provide adequate, if not some of the best Spider-Man works, Romita would exit Spider-Man in 1971 to be replaced by Gil Kane.
Now, who wrote after you?
After having written more than 100 issues of Spider-Man consecutively from the beginning, which represents, I guess, about 10 years of Spider-Man. Around 1970, I became the publisher, and I didn't have the time to write all the stories, or hardly any stories. So I had to look around for somebody who could do the editing and the writing, and Roy Thomas, I considered my best writer at the time, a sincere, dedicated guy. So I made him the editor, and he wrote Spider-Man and a number of other books.
Lee would be replaced by Jerry Conway, where he and Kane would continue to write some famous storylines as well.
I gave it to another writer, and he said, "How shall I write it?" And I said, "Well, any way at all, as long as it's good." And then I took a trip somewhere on a lecture tour, and when I came back, I found out Gwen Stacy was dead. He had killed her. And I said, when I said do it any way you want, I didn't mean kill off all the characters.
Conway would leave in 1975 to be replaced by Archie Goodwin. Over several years, there would be a constant rotating door of artists and writers, resulting in fresh new stories. Even with the departure of Lee and Ditko, Spider-Man would continue to live on with new talent behind him.
And years later, other artists took over, and no matter how it was drawn, no matter who drew it, the strip was always powerful and successful.
So thanks for having me. You have no idea how much this means to me.
Welcome back to the show, our friend Tom Holland, everybody.
You're the most responsible man I've ever known.
Spider-Man was created by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko. Spider-Man means so much to so many people, and the story behind him is beyond fascinating. It's important to shed light on some of the controversy and contention following his creation. The driving force behind Spider-Man's creation was Stan Lee's unwillingness to back down.
If you have an idea that you genuinely think is good, don't let some idiot talk you out of it. If there is something that you feel is good, something you want to do, something that means something to you, try to do it. Because I think you can only do your best work if you're doing what you want to do, and if you're doing it the way you think it should be done, and if you can take pride in it after you've done it, no matter what it is. So don't let idiots talk you out of something that you think is good. Whatever you do, give it your best shot. You'll be glad you did. Excelsior! Thank you.
If you guys made it this far into the video, make sure to check out our Patreon and our Instagram linked in the description below.
Also remember to like and subscribe. And remember, with great power comes great responsibility.